Deathworlders called it just a scratch. Alien medics declared a galactic emergency. Your arm has been severed. You require immediate emergency care. Dr. Vexel's voice shrieked across the sterile medical bay, his 6 trembling limbs working furiously as his holographic scanners blared warnings in a dozen alien dialects. Every monitor in the room pulsed with flashing red symbols, universal signs of a critical, life-threatening injury. And yet, the human just sat there. Lieutenant Marcus Grayson of the Terran Marine Corps inspected his left arm, or what remained of it. Just below the elbow, a jagged stump of flesh was still smoking from the plasma bolt that had taken it. The charred wound should have sent him into shock. The pain alone should have killed him. But instead Marcus just sighed. It's just a scratch. Vexel nearly collapsed. You have lost an appendage. The Veltraxian medic's voice reached an ultrasonic pitch, making the other alien staff recoil. He spun toward the surgical team, his tendrils gesturing wildly. Code Black. Full life support. Activate the nanosite restoration matrix. Whoa, Doc, chill, Marcus interrupted, grinning as he wiped soot from his tattered uniform. No need to freak out. It's not the first time I've lost a limb. Silence. The entire room of alien medics froze. Not the first time? Vexel's bioluminescent eyes dimmed in horror. You mean to say you have experienced this level of mutilation before? Marcus tilted his head. Well, yeah. Last time it was my leg. Got blown off in a boarding skirmish. Hurt like hell for a few minutes, but the regrowth vat had me patched up in a week. Vexel's 6 hearts nearly failed at once. A week. Losing a limb was a death sentence for most galactic species. Some of them didn't even survive deep lacerations. But this Deathworlder was treating total limb loss like it was a scraped knee. A wave of pure existential terror rippled through the medical bay. Every Veltraxian in the room instinctively took a step back. Marcus, noticing their shock, sighed again. Look, if you don't have a Regan vat, I'll just slap on a prosthetic. Hell, I've got a buddy who's running around with 3 cybernetic limbs and a reinforced skull. Vexel collapsed. His tendrils spasmed as sheer, incomprehensible panic shut down his higher brain functions. The entire emergency staff screamed. Code Red. Code Red. Medical nightmare scenario. Human has lost a limb and is completely unaffected. Someone contact the council. Marcus blinked. The hell is wrong with you guys? A galactic emergency is declared. News spread fast. By the time Marcus finished his post-battle debriefing, his medical emergency had already gone interstellar. Galactic news networks broadcasted breaking alerts. Human soldier mutilated, remains fully operational. Deathworlders shrug off critical injuries, galactic scientists horrified. Is human biology a violation of natural law? Within hours, the Galactic Council had convened an emergency session. The chamber was in chaos. Ambassadors from over 100 species were screeching in panic, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and disbelief. They can survive total dismemberment. This is unnatural. We need restrictions on human combat units. They are too dangerous. One particularly frazzled reptilian delegate slammed his claw against the podium. These humans should be classified as biological weapons. This is an existential threat. Existential threat? An Alderai noble scoffed, her gills flaring. They called it a scratch. What kind of species treats limb loss like an inconvenience? A holographic replay of Marcus' medical bay encounter flickered in the air. The moment he casually dismissed his injury played over and over for the stunned council. Each replay only amplified the horror. One ambassador fainted. Another whispered in a hushed, terrified tone, They don't feel pain like we do they? The chamber fell silent. Then a grim voice cut through the quiet. Admiral Krovax of the Zalari Empire. Pain does not deter them, he said, his mandibles clicking in unease. Even grievous injuries do not incapacitate them. I've seen humans fight while bleeding out. I've seen them laugh while broken and battered. And now, we learn they can survive amputation like it is nothing? A cold dread settled over the room. What were they dealing with? Meanwhile, back on the Terran ship, Marcus stepped into the mess hall, completely unaware that he had triggered a galactic crisis. His bandaged stump barely even throbbed as he grabbed a tray of food and plopped down across from his squad mate, Lieutenant Ramirez. Dude, Ramirez said through a mouthful of rations. I heard you made the doc pass out. Marcus snorted. I barely said anything. Bro, you told him you've lost a limb before. So Ramirez gave him a deadpan look. Marcus, normal species don't survive that. Marcus paused mid-bite. Wait, really? Yes, really. Ramirez threw his hands up. Jesus, man, you just scared the entire Galactic Council. We've got aliens calling for emergency sanctions against our biology. Marcus blinked. All because of my arm? No, because you didn't care about losing it. Marcus scratched his head. Weird. He shrugged, then went back to eating. This only made it worse. Across the mess hall, 3 visiting alien envoys sat staring in abject horror. Their translator implants had caught every word. They were sitting across from a man who had just lost a limb, treated it like an inconvenience, and was now happily eating dinner like nothing happened. One of them excused himself and immediately sent an urgent message to his homeworld. They do not fear pain. They do not fear injury. We must never go to war with the humans. The Council's decision. The Galactic Council's debate raged for hours. The footage of Marcus casually dismissing his severed limb played on loop in front of the highest-ranking leaders of the galaxy. Finally, a decision was reached. The Supreme Chancellor of the Council stood before the Assembly, her voice grim. We can no longer ignore this revelation. Humanity's biology is beyond our comprehension, and possibly beyond our control. Effective immediately. She took a deep breath. Human combat personnel are to be classified as extreme-level hazard entities. No species is to engage them in direct combat unless absolutely necessary. Silence. Then one ambassador whispered what everyone else was thinking. What if they lose more than a limb? The Supreme Chancellor's expression darkened. Then we pray they never get angry. The Council's grim decision. The Supreme Chancellor's decree sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Human combat personnel were now classified as extreme-level hazard entities. That designation was previously reserved for rogue AI swarms, planet-devouring bioplagues, and reality-warping anomalies. And now, humans were on that list. The chamber sat in uneasy silence as the declaration settled in. War with humanity was no longer an option. Not because of diplomacy. Not because of ethics. But because it was suicide. But some species didn't accept that. Across the table, General Admiral of the Drex Dominion slammed his 3-clawed fist against his podium. His species, a war-hardened reptilian race, had always prided themselves as the strongest warriors in the galaxy. They had conquered over 50 worlds, overthrown empires, crushed rebellions, and now the Council expected them to fear these fleshy mammals? Unacceptable. We are acting as though these humans are unkillable, Admiral growled, his slitted eyes narrowing. Their biological resilience is certainly remarkable. But let us not forget they are still flesh and bone. The chamber murmured uncertainly. They can be broken, Admiral continued. They can be tested. And I will prove it. The chamber went silent. The Supreme Chancellor frowned. General, what are you suggesting? A slow, dangerous grin spread across Admiral's scaled face. I am suggesting, he said, that we capture a human and see exactly where their limits lie. A dangerous gamble. Within hours, the Drex Dominion Special Operations Division mobilized. Their objective? To test the true biological limits of a human. Their target? Lieutenant Marcus Grayson. He was chosen specifically because of the incident that triggered the Council's emergency meeting. If there was anyone whose limits needed testing, it was the human who shrugged off a severed limb. The mission had to be executed carefully. Direct engagement was out of the question. No one wanted to trigger a war with humanity. Instead, they'd rely on their most advanced infiltration unit. The Ghost Talents. A covert team of elite Drex assassins, trained in stealth, subterfuge, and silent extractions. No human would ever see them coming. Or so they thought. The extraction gone wrong. The operation began at 0300 shipboard hours. Marcus was asleep in his bunk, oblivious to the 8-man extraction team moving through the Terran outpost. Their cloaking fields rendered them nearly invisible, and their biodampening technology ensured no heat or movement sensors detected them. They bypassed security, neutralized the automated defenses, even infiltrated the officers' barracks without tripping a single alarm. It was flawless, until they made one fatal mistake. As one of the Ghost Talons reached for Marcus' unconscious form, his gloved claw brushed against the human's exposed skin. And Marcus woke up immediately. What the F? Marcus reacted on pure instinct. One moment he was asleep. The next, he had grabbed the Drex soldier by the throat and slammed him into the wall so hard the metal dented. The ghost Talon gasped, his cloaking field flickering out as his body impacted the bulkhead. The other operatives moved to react, but Marcus was already moving. The human launched himself off the bed, his body still half asleep but running on nothing but Deathworlder muscle memory. He tore through the next soldier with a brutal elbow strike. His single remaining arm was enough. The assassin collapsed instantly. The others finally decloaked, realizing stealth was useless. But it was already too late. Marcus was awake. The fight no one expected. Alarms blared as the fight spilled into the corridors. The Terran outpost security forces were scrambling, but Marcus was already handling it. One arm. No armor. No weapons. And yet, the ghost Talons were losing. One Drex warrior lunged with a plasma dagger. Marcus sidestepped, caught his wrist and redirected the blade into the alien's own chest. Another tried to tackle him. Marcus simply planted his feet and let the attacker rebound off him like he'd hit solid Durasteel. By the time security forces arrived, Marcus had already crippled half the team. The remaining Drex retreated. Marcus, panting, bloodied but still grinning, cracked his neck. "Well," he muttered. "That was fun." The Galactic Council reacts. The footage of the failed capture attempt leaked within hours. Galactic leaders watched in mute horror as they saw a single unarmed human take down a team of their best operatives with one arm. Admiral, the very general who had ordered the operation, sat in stunned silence as the video looped again and again. His warriors, his ghost Talons, had been beaten in their own game. The council chamber erupted into chaos. "They're impossible. We should have never provoked them. The Dominion was foolish to test a Deathworlder." The Supreme Chancellor's eyes darkened. She turned to Admiral. "Well, General, do you still believe humans can be tested?" The reptilian swallowed dryly. "No," he admitted. "We cannot afford to test them further." The Chancellor nodded. "Then let this be our final declaration." She stepped forward and her voice echoed through the chamber. "From this moment forward, humanity is to be classified as an apex-class species. No direct engagements. No hostilities. And above all, never provoke them again." A heavy silence followed. And then, a single, chilling question was whispered by a terrified ambassador. "If a human can do this with one arm, what happens if they're at full strength?" Nobody had an answer. Adderless final gamble. The Galactic Council had spoken. Humanity was not to be provoked. Their resilience, their sheer biological insanity, had been demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt. The failed Ghost Talon operation was proof enough. One armed Terran had systematically humiliated an entire elite strike force. And yet, Admiral refused to accept it. The Drex Dominion had built its entire existence on the belief that strength dictated survival. If they backed down now, they wouldn't just lose face, they would lose their dominance. Other species would challenge them. To him it was simple. If humans were this strong, then that meant one thing. They needed to be wiped out. And if the Council wouldn't do it, he would. Operation Last Dominion. It was a reckless, desperate, and absolutely suicidal plan. Admiral wasn't an idiot. He knew the Dominion's fleet couldn't win against the full force of the Terran Armada. Their technological superiority was questionable at best, and their fleet's last engagement with humans had ended in a disastrous stalemate. But this wasn't a war. This was an assassination. If the humans had a weakness, it was their insane loyalty to one another. They didn't see each other as expendable resources like many galactic empires. When one of them was in danger, they reacted like a hive swarm defending their queen. And if there was one human whose death could shatter them, it was the one they had already made famous. Lieutenant Marcus Grayson. The very man who had humiliated them. The Dominion's goal wasn't to defeat all humans. It was to crush their morale, to prove that even their strongest could bleed and die. A single, decisive planetary strike. And so Admiral made his move. Strike at the heart. The attack came without warning. No official declaration of war. No demands. No grandstanding. The Dominion strike fleet exited slipspace above Tarsus 4, a Terran-controlled world where Marcus was stationed for medical observation after his recent injuries. The planet wasn't a military stronghold, just a frontier colony with a small defense force. It should have been an easy target. Within moments, the Dominion's orbital bombardment cannons charged. Energy lances rained down from the sky, obliterating planetary defenses before they could fully respond. Marcus had seconds to react. He had just left the medical facility, still in a sling, when the first blast struck. The sky lit up like the birth of a star, and the city's shield generators failed almost instantly. Tarsus 4 was under siege. Marcus barely had time to grab a comm unit. "Command, this is Grayson. What the hell is happening?" The response was static. Then, finally, a terrified voice. "We're under attack. The Dominion fleet. Oh God, they're targeting the city." Marcus gritted his teeth. His instincts kicked in immediately. His wounds didn't matter. His orders didn't matter. Civilians were in danger. And he wasn't about to let that happen. The ground war begins. Marcus sprinted toward the makeshift defense lines, where whatever military personnel had survived the initial bombardment were desperately rallying. Tarsus 4 wasn't a fortress world, but it was a Terran colony, which meant every civilian knew how to shoot. Makeshift militias were already forming, armed with whatever they could find. Old plasma rifles, jury-rigged cannons, even improvised explosive traps meant for repelling native wildlife. And when they saw Marcus approaching, bloodied but still moving, a roar of defiance swept through them. Lieutenant Grayson's still alive. If he can fight, we can fight. For Marcus, it wasn't about survival. It was about holding the line. He grabbed a discarded pulse rifle, wincing as his still-healing arm protested. His body screamed at him to stop, but his mind was already locked in. This wasn't about him. It was about Tarsus 4. And as the first Dominion drop pods slammed into the ground, disgorging waves of Drex shock troopers, Marcus gave the only order that made sense. Stand your ground. And then the real battle began. When Deathworlders refused to die, the Drex shock troopers had been trained for planetary assaults. They expected quick victories, overwhelming force, fast collapses, and minimal resistance. They weren't prepared for Terrans. The humans fought like cornered animals. Marcus was everywhere, one arm half recovered and still tearing through enemies like a man possessed. He didn't stop, didn't hesitate. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder? He powered through it. A Dominion warrior tried to stab him? He disarmed them and broke their arm. Explosions rained down and still Marcus kept fighting. And the rest of the colony followed his lead. Farmers with shotguns were outmaneuvering trained soldiers. Miners with plasma drills were gutting shock troopers like fish. Children were throwing homemade explosives at advancing Dominion mechs. This wasn't just a fight. It was a massacre. But not the one the Dominion had expected. They had thought this would be an execution. Instead, they had walked into hell. Adderall's fatal mistake. Watching the battle unfold from his command vessel, Adderall felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. His forces were losing. To a half-recovered man with one arm and a bunch of colonists with farm equipment. It was impossible. It was infuriating. But he couldn't let it stand. And so, he made a decision. One final order. A planetary annihilation strike. If the humans refused to surrender, he would wipe them out entirely. The human counterattack. As the Dominion fleet prepared to fire, a new slipspace signature appeared on Adderall's scanners. Then two. Then dozens. And that's when he knew. The Terran fleet had arrived. Adderall's blood ran cold as the screen filled with Terran dreadnoughts. The fleet had come not just to defend Tarsus 4, but to end this. The final battle for survival had begun. Humanity's wrath unleashed. Adderall had never known true terror until that moment. The Terran fleet had arrived, not just to defend Tarsus 4 but to erase the Dominion from existence. Hundreds of warships emerged from slipspace in perfect formation. Dreadnoughts, carriers, destroyers, planetary assault craft. Every type of ship built for war, each one glowing with the energy of charged weapons. The Dominion had come to wipe out one human. The humans had come to wipe out the Dominion. And Adderall knew with a sinking certainty that he had sealed his own fate. But he still had one chance. Fire the annihilation strike, now. He bellowed, his claws digging into the armrest of his command throne. Destroy the colony before they can react. Across the Dominion fleet, planetary siege cannons powered up, energy building in their cores. A direct strike would reduce Tarsus 4 to a smoldering wasteland. It would all be over in seconds. At least, that's what Adderall thought. Instead, what happened next would go down as the single greatest tactical humiliation in Dominion history. The trap springs shut. The moment the annihilation cannons reached full charge, the Terran flagship sent out a single signal. A frequency spike. A pre-coded activation key. Adderall's ships shuddered violently. Across the Dominion fleet, systems went dead. Weapons shut down. Shields collapsed. Engines failed. The Terrans had disabled them. Adderall stared at his screen in disbelief. Oh. And then it hit him. The Terrans had planned for this. They'd known the Dominion might strike again. They'd known about the annihilation cannons. And they had spent the last 6 months embedding a virus into Dominion fleet systems. Marcus Grayson's Ghost Talon incident? That wasn't just a failure on the Dominion's part. That had been the setup. His capture had been deliberate. The medical scans he'd undergone on their ship? A ruse to upload Terran cyber warfare protocols directly into the Dominion fleet systems. The Dominion had never stood a chance. Their own arrogance had delivered their entire military into Terran hands. And now they were helpless. The final blow. The Terran Admiral's voice echoed across the open channel. Admiral of the Drex Dominion, you have committed an act of war against the United Terran systems. Your fleet is disabled. Your surrender is non-negotiable. Admiral snarled. Surrender? He spat. You think I would? You misunderstand, the Admiral interrupted, voice as calm as death itself. We're not asking. The Terran fleet opened fire. What happened next wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a fight. It was an execution. With their ships dead in the water, the Dominion forces could only watch in horrified silence as Terran Mac rounds, plasma lances and railgun barrages tore through them. Ships were ripped apart. Entire cruisers shattered under hyper-accelerated slugs. Carriers detonated in brilliant fireballs as their reactors overloaded. It was over in minutes. The once mighty Dominion fleet, the same force that had tried to erase a human colony, was now nothing but drifting wreckage. And at the center of it all, Admiral's flagship burned. A Deathworlders justice. Marcus stood amidst the wreckage of Tarsus IV's defense lines, pulse rifle still gripped in his one good hand. He watched as debris rained from the sky. The battle was over. The Dominion was finished. He heard cheering from the surviving colonists, loud, defiant, victorious. They had stood against an empire, against a force meant to annihilate them. And they had won. His calm crackled. Lieutenant Grayson. The voice belonged to the Terran Admiral. Sir, Marcus replied. We've retrieved Admiral from his flagship. He's in custody. Marcus exhaled slowly. He could already guess what the Dominion warlord was thinking. For all his brutality, Admiral probably believed he had won something. That he had, at the very least, forced humanity to show its true savagery. Marcus raised the comm to his lips. Tell him one thing for me. And what's that, Lieutenant? Marcus smiled grimly. That was for a scratch. The aftermath, humanity's final message. The fallout of the battle reshaped the galaxy. The Dominion, once a feared power, was crippled beyond repair. Their fleet was gone. Their leaders were hunted down by the very council that had once feared humanity. The message was clear. You don't start wars with humans. Because they don't just win. They end you. And somewhere, deep within the darkest corners of the galaxy, alien warlords and council leaders whispered among themselves, voices trembling with the realization of what they had witnessed. Humanity had been underestimated for the last time. Final line that lingers. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Never make a Deathworlder bleed. Because they'll make sure you never bleed again. The end rocket fire.